Here's the Leafs' third shooter.
Here's Sundin down in front of the net. Was Tucker. There's going to be a penalty. Sundin's got it! A blockbuster. Colossus of a trade.
There are players in NHL history who define terror through raw violence. We remember the legendary enforcers like Dave the Hammer Schultz, who broke faces and records with equal ferocity. We remember Gordie Howe, a man built like a bull who turned the elbow into a lethal weapon. But there is another kind of fear, a quiet, heavy dread that comes from realizing you are physically helpless against a giant. When Matt Sundin stepped onto the ice, the atmosphere didn't just change, it solidified. At 6'5" with a reach that seemed almost unfair, he wasn't just a center, he was a physical obstacle that defied the laws of the game. Doug Gilmour once described Sundin as someone who never looked like he was in a hurry and somehow made everyone else feel like they were. That wasn't because of a lack of effort, it was because of a terrifying level of physical control. Most dominant players try to overwhelm you with speed or chaos, but Sundin did the opposite. He used his massive frame to slow the world down until it moved at his pace. From the moment he entered the league as the first European ever selected first overall, there was a target on his back, but the pressure didn't break him, it only made him more inevitable. The terror of facing Sundin wasn't about a single massive hit or a dirty play. It was the feeling of a defender closing in, ready to make a play, only to realize that Sundin had already turned his body into an unbreakable shield. You would lean into him with everything you had. Try to pin him to the boards or hack at his stick, and nothing worked. He didn't just protect the puck, he owned the space around it. By the time you realized you couldn't move him, the play was already over. You weren't just defending a player, you were fighting a losing battle against a titan who had already decided you weren't going to win. This was the beginning of the nightmare for NHL defenders. And as the game went on, the physical toll only got heavier. Control is one thing, but it becomes a nightmare when you realize you simply cannot move him. This is where the physical reality of Matt Sundin became a problem for every defender in the league. At 6'5", with a wingspan that seemed almost illegal, he didn't just control the puck, he weaponized his reach to protect it. Once Sundin established his position, getting the puck back wasn't a hockey play, it was a physical war. Defenders tried everything in the book. They leaned their entire body weight into him, tried to pin him against the boards, and hacked at his legs. Nothing worked. The more they committed to the physical struggle, the more they lost their own balance. There is a sequence that defines this perfectly. Sundin receives the puck in the corner, and two defenders close in immediately. One from behind, one cutting off the lane. In any other era with any other player, that should be the end of the play, but Sundin simply lowers his center of gravity, turns his back, and uses his massive frame as a human shield. Then he turns. Not with explosive speed, but with a calculated heavy force. Suddenly, both defenders are left behind him, out of position and out of the play. By the time they tried to recover, it was already too late. For a legend like Nicklas Lidstrom, facing Sundin felt like trying to get the puck from someone who already decided you won't. That is the peak of physical intimidation. It's the realization that you cannot win the battle of strength. Most players react to pressure, but Sundin used it. Every hit, every shove, every extra body the defense committed gave him more information and more space to exploit. Shift after shift, that physical pressure didn't lead to a turnover. It led to fatigue, a deep, bone-weary exhaustion that came from trying to solve a problem that had no answer. The scary part? He did it all in silence. No shouting, no retaliation. Just a relentless, inevitable force that wore you down. Until you stopped trying to win the shift and just started trying to survive it. By now, the pattern of physical dominance was clear. But there was another layer that made Matt Sundin even more terrifying to deal with. Respected terror. This wasn't the kind of respect you earn after your career. It was the kind players gave him while they were still being physically dismantled by him on the ice. Teams did not just defend him, they adjusted their entire systems for him. Matchups were abandoned, lines were shifted, and entire defensive units leaned toward his side of the rink, because his physical presence was an inevitable force. The moment Sundin had even a sliver of ice, the game started to tilt, and everyone on the rink could feel the pressure building. Defenders stopped trying to win the physical battles. They started trying not to lose them so badly. Facing him, it often felt like you weren't trying to stop him anymore. You were just trying to limit the damage he was about to do to your structure and your stamina. That is the ultimate shift. when the opponent stops dictating and starts merely reacting to your physical presence. Once that happens, your control over the game is already gone. Every extra step toward him opened another lane for his teammates. Yet Sundin never rushed to exploit it. He waited. He let the mistake reveal itself through the physical fatigue of his opponents. There was no clear solution. Play him tight, and he used his 6'5" frame to control the pace. Give him space, and he controlled the play with his massive reach. Over time, you stopped trying to win the shift and simply tried to survive it. What truly separated Sundin was the mental and physical weight he carried for over a decade as the face of the Toronto Maple Leafs. In a franchise filled with history and legends, Sundin stood above them all, carrying a responsibility that changes everything. Every game mattered more. Every shift carried more weight. And every mistake felt heavier under the relentless gaze of the Toronto market. Yet, even under this crushing pressure, nothing about his physical presence changed. There was no visible panic and no outward frustration. Night after night, he remained the same calm, immovable force in the most high-pressure moments. Late in games with the score close and the crowd tense. Most players speed up and lose their composure. Sundin did the opposite. He used his massive frame to slow everything down. He trusted his physical strength, and he trusted the moment. When your best player never panics under a swarm of defenders, that steadiness spreads to the entire bench. For his teammates, it often felt like no matter how chaotic the game became, there was always time and space whenever he had the puck. This was leadership in its most physical form, not loud or emotional, but steady and relentless. But carrying a franchise for years is a different kind of challenge than just dominating a shift. It is a quiet, constant pressure that stays with you long after the game ends. Sundin didn't just play for the Maple Leafs. He held the entire organization together through his sheer physical and mental endurance. He was the anchor that refused to be moved, regardless of how hard the storm blew. When you strip away the numbers, the goals, and the career points, what remains is the memory of a physical presence that refused to be moved. Mats Sundin did not just dominate in short, explosive bursts. He stretched his physical control across the entire game. For opponents, it was a slow, grinding realization that they weren't losing in one single moment. They were slowly losing the entire game, one physical confrontation at a time. In the history of the NHL, we usually define terrifying through the lens of raw aggression or devastating speed. But there is a deeper kind of fear that comes from a player who never looks out of control, even when 3 defenders are hanging off his back. Sundin reshaped the experience of everyone on the ice, making veteran defenders feel like children trying to move a mountain. The real impact of a player like Sundin isn't just what you see during the highlights, it's the feeling that stays after the game ends. It is the memory of that quiet, heavy pressure and the sense of inevitability that followed his every move. He left behind a standard of physical and mental composure that very few in the history of the sport have ever reached. So the question remains, was he terrifying because of what he did, or because of how he made every opponent feel while he was doing it? If you have ever faced that kind of immovable force, you already know the answer, because once you experience that level of control, you never forget it. It becomes the benchmark for what a true Titan looks like on the ice. Ultimately, the terror of Mats Sundin wasn't just found in the heat of the battle, it was found in the silence that followed. When a player like Sundin leaves the ice, they leave behind an echo, a reminder that for a decade, one man dictated the physical terms of every game he played. He didn't need the bloody knuckles of a street fighter or the erratic speed of a sprinter to haunt your next match. He did it through the memory of his reach, his strength, and that unsettling, immovable composure. For the defenders who retired alongside him, the stories aren't about flashy highlights. They are about the bruises earned in the corners and the mental exhaustion of trying to solve the unsolvable. They remember the moment they realized that no amount of force could knock number 13 off his stride. That is the final measure of a legend. When your physical presence is so absolute that it changes the way your opponents think about the game, long after the final buzzer sounds. Sundin was a Titan who carried a city, a franchise, and a legacy on his back, without ever letting the weight show. He proved that sometimes the most terrifying thing on the ice isn't the man who creates the most noise. It's the one who provides the most control. And as long as hockey is played, players will still be looking for the next immovable force, the next inevitable giant who can turn a game into a masterpiece of physical dominance. Because once you felt that kind of power, you never stop looking for it. You just hope, for your sake, that you're not the one standing in its way. Perhaps that is why players never really talked about Mats Sundin the same way they talked about others. It wasn't louder or more dramatic, it was just different. Because when you face speed, you can adjust. When you face aggression, you could push back. But when you face that level of physical control, there's nothing to react to. You are always a step behind, regardless of how hard you fight. That is a feeling that doesn't stay on the ice. It follows you into the next shift, the next game, and the next season. You remember the moment where everything looked fine, where you thought you were in position, and then suddenly you realize you hadn't been for a long time. That is what separates players like Sundin. They don't just win, they leave a shift in how you see the game. Once you have experienced that kind of immovable force, you start recognizing it in other eras, in other moments that look quiet on the surface but feel completely different underneath. Not many ever reach that level of inevitability. So the question remains, if physical control like that is what truly makes a player dangerous, then who else in NHL history ever had it? And more importantly, who still does today? Because those are the players worth paying attention to. The ones who do not just change the score, but change the way the game feels while it is being played. What do you think about Matt Sundin's physical dominance? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this look at the NHL's most terrifying legends, like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching.